everyone, and thank you for coming to Linda Albert's book launch. We're so thrilled to have another talented resident sharing her skills with us. Today we have her book for sale in the back, and it's a new poetry book that she's just released, and entitled Charting the Lost Continent. Linda Albert is an award-winning, internationally published poet and essayist, and we're so thrilled to have her living here at Sarasota Bay Club amongst us. So I'd like you all to welcome her, please. Warm welcome. Linda's going to tell you all about her new book.
Well, compared to Kathleen, I'm height challenged, so I hope you can all see me and hear me. Raise your hand if I drop. My daughter has made it very clear that I must not drop the end of any sentences. So if that happens, let me know. I am so excited to be here today. I've been writing as long as I can remember. And I published professionally since I was in my early 20s. My mother, who was a strong-minded and practical woman, this is not to disparage my mother, admonished me to stay away from being a poet. She said, and I think she wasn't far from the truth, most people don't like poetry, and you can't make a living from it. So wanting to please my mother, and also because her dream was that I would write a best-selling novel that would be made into a movie, and I would do that while raising my children and cooking with one hand and writing the novel on the other, and then I would become rich and famous with the other hand. And if any of you remember the movie The Egg and I, that was her motto. Sad for my mother, I never wrote a novel. And there I was, continuing to write poetry, sort of sneaking on the side. Meanwhile, I go off and do other things, raise children, get into various careers that I enjoyed. I love theater. I was worked for a communication consulting firm. I've done a lot of interesting things in my life. And here was this gift that was always nagging at me saying, what about that book? What about your poetry? And finally, after the joy, truly, I cannot tell you how grateful I am to be living at Sarasota Bay Club. I love it here, and at the risk of getting a little weepy, those of you who knew Stu, my significant other, who just passed away 3 weeks ago, loved it too. There wasn't really a day that went by that we didn't congratulate ourselves for our brilliance at moving here, and at getting to know so many lovely, interesting, warm people. So in any case, here I am, after I got settled in a beautiful apartment we never expected to pick because we wanted something larger that never came available, with views that are so conducive to being poetic. I finally sat down last spring and started to put my collection together. I worked all spring, all summer, and all fall. And finally, here it is, Charting the Lost Continent. What matters now? What matters now? The unmade bed I want to straighten, excitement in my chest, creative leaping, the way I'm wed to my computer, the poems spilling over without rest. What matters now? The pages that I longed to fill, the shirts I said today I'd iron, the polish chipping on my toes, the need to light a waiting candle, the time I've missed to meditate. What matters now? The poem. There are 91 pages in my book. I thought for a long time, beat myself up for the fact that I waited so long, and the book was so long overdue. But now I think it's both long overdue and right on time, because it's become a collection, and it has a certain it traces such a long part of my personal life, my writing life, that I think that makes a difference. So I sort of reorganized everything for today, but I'm going to start with my early adult life with my husband. My husband, Jim Albert, passed away 9.5 years ago, and he loved this particular style of writing, which was very popular in the 60s when it was published, those kinds of poems in McCall's and the Wall Street Journal, and when Ogden Nash was my great hero. This is entitled Lorelei. I have a husband who doesn't quibble with anything that's fit to nibble, and anything he nibbles he considers fit, even cold toast that the baby has bit. When I prepared a sumptuous dinner, he doesn't label it a Pillsbury dinner until he sampled a generous smidge of leftover this or that from the fridge. My husband has a remarkable knack for turning a banquet into a snack. He loves things canned or frozen or mottled, nor does he mind if they're minced or mottled. Oh, the other was bottled. My husband is a pleasure to cook for. If you want to meet him, just try to look for a man who is simply and utterly unable to get past the refrigerator to the dinner table. We typically used to go to Detroit, which is where I was from, where until my parents became snowbirds in Florida, my mother would prepare sumptuous Thanksgiving dinners. But one Thanksgiving, one of our daughters, I have 4 children, became ill, and we realized that it wouldn't be a good idea to go to Detroit. So we had to cancel out. And Jim was so worried about not having Thanksgiving dinner that he ran out, bought a turkey, and convinced me that I should cook it all night long. And then he proceeded to nibble it all day long. So we never had Thanksgiving dinner. That's Jim. He was an introverted man. And it took me a long time, years, to understand what that meant. And in the early days when I was home being a volunteer and raising 4 children, and he was out trying to make a living, when he came home, what I didn't understand was that he needed it to be quiet, and I was ready to talk to an adult. So I would chase after him, try to communicate, and the more I did that, the more irritated he got. This is called gender negotiation. Once upon a time, I met a dragon. Instead of getting into a power struggle or fight, we sat down and talked. I'm not sure how this happened, but it did. He said he felt unfairly treated, poorly understood. He was a dragon, after all. He had to stay true to himself, didn't he? Fire breathing was his nature. What could he do about that? I told him I understood that he had every right to be his dragon self, but if he never let people know he had feelings, was forever threatening death by fire, he had to expect there would always be opponents out to slay him. He was so relieved to finally tell his side of the story. He offered to be my protector when I went off into the unknown. I told him it was protection enough to finally understand him. But life goes on. The ups, the downs, a lot of joy. And then sadly, because we're mortal, and
It's too bad.
we not only don't live forever, but sometimes we have to suffer along the way with illness. And my husband had Parkinson's disease for 21 years. He was very able to take care of himself for much of that time, but the last years were really quite difficult. This is called 4 a.m. When it's your turn for the shit to hit the fan, when it's your turn for for the health of someone you love to fall apart. When it's your turn to careen from crisis to crisis like Dodgem cars at the county fair. When it's your turn to live without sleep and the food you eat sticks in your throat unchewed and untasted. When it's your turn for the space in your life to be devoured like the streets of Calcutta. When it's your turn to get too many phone calls you don't have energy to answer, and too many flowers you can't find time to water, and too many meals that rot in your refrigerator, and the sick person becomes a tyrant. When it's your turn to watch your children turn into parents, trying to save what is forever broken. When it's your turn, when it's your turn, when it's your turn, it's your turn. And then there's the time when we watch somebody love and we have no power to stop the course of what's going on. This is entitled "Of Physicists and Elegies." Nothing is ever lost, so say the physicists. Matter transforms, ice to water, water, air, bulb, peony, mountain, cave, mother, egg, boy, full to empty, hard to soft. My college roommate, dead since April, plays her fiddle where angels get to hear. Only angels get to hear. The dopamine commands that tell my husband's legs to move, escape. His vocal cords cannot connect. The whispered dial tone of his voice, a maddening wrong number. I want them back the way they were. The way they were. I want them. I mourn for silver snaps, concertos, husband, friend, flesh firm, vociferous, ironic, moving. Ironic flesh, vociferous, firm, and moving. One of the great gifts of the many gifts of my life was that my husband's first cousin married a woman who was an artist. And as I was a writer, she was a graphic artist, and so we were very supportive and non-competitive, and we raised our children on the same street, and so they were, I think, a gift to each other. And she particularly liked that part of me that was a poet, which was a great gift to me. Tulip bulbs for Sarah, and with thanks to Emily Dickinson. Excuse me. She brought me tulip bulbs that fall. Here, she said. Plant them, she said. They'll bloom next spring, I promise. I had been dancing in the woods when it happened. The sky turned black, suddenly, just like that, turning the reds and yellows lifeless. Frightened, I said I had to leave. The children would be coming home from school. In the dream, my daughter's note was in the kitchen. It was a message, but I couldn't hear the words. I never meant to dance the poet's tune. This standing death was never in my plans, you see. "Do it now," she said. "The frost is only part way down. It's not too late to plant the bulbs, I promise." The clay was worse than rock. It bruised my hands to dig. The bending hurt my back. "Nothing can grow in this," I said. In winter, we made candles, wrecking my only double boiler to gain a salmon pink that didn't match and barely held the flame. "It isn't any use," I said. "Just hang on till spring," she said. "You never know what might happen if you can just hang on." They started through the earth in April. Tough green shoots, pushing the stubborn clay aside as though the struggle was actually worth the trouble. She brought me tulip bulbs that fall. "Here," she said. "Plant them," she said. Now I'll give you a few of the kind of poems that I wrote in the days when I was raising my children and had the good fortune to be published in McCall's and places like that.
Really?
In praise of PTA. Some of you have heard this already. "At last for us has come to flower that long-awaited wondrous hour. No more the outcasts of the block, the proud procession of the clock has finally brought us to this day and membership in PTA. We sallied forth like knights with sabers to march as one with all our neighbors, be ribboned and be casseroled, protectors of one 5-year-old. With eagerness and yet forbearance, we gathered with the chosen parents and offered up our steaming cartons in honor of the kindergarten. At wee small tables, we dined, libated on chairs our offspring had vacated. Mothers fair and fathers strapping, seated proudly, overlapping. No vineyard fruit could be more heady than one's first PTA spaghetti. This is a little more serious. This, I don't know how many of you have had this experience, but you know, if you've had children and you raise them and you do the best you can and you hope that that's been good enough, and you think you let them go, and then sometimes it turns out that you have to let them go all over again because they don't turn out to be exactly what you expected them to be or who you expected them to be, and they need to follow a different path. And this is called When They Were Born. She watched as though from another country, the mirror positioned between her legs a more chaste picture than she expected. She thought she'd be humiliated by the exposure, but all she thought about was her baby struggling to get out, as each have had their struggles since, while she, still thinking they were hers, housed as they were once inside her, taking her all to bring them to life, and her job always to keep them there, in life. "Stop pushing," the doctor warned, the cruelest words she'd ever heard, when all her being was made for pushing. "I can't," she croaked, but she obeyed. Anything for those her most creative gifts. Now they are grown, as impossible to believe as the original labors, and once again, she must stop pushing. "I didn't think I was," she said. "It's been so long since they left home." But freedom comes at higher and higher prices, both theirs and hers. These days, no rituals exist for adults to go alone into the wilderness of their own lives, face demons and catastrophes from which no one else can save them. No rituals exist for mothers to let go. No midwives or medicine men to cut belated cords. Only fortitude and oxymorons can protect them as they learn to share the distance these second births demand. How are you doing? Are you getting tired? I see some people nodding. She's nodding. I don't have too many more.
Think where you are. It's where you are. This is where we live. Where they not.
You can go home anytime you want. This is entitled Witch Dead, Spell Broken, Awakened Princess Connects with P. You remember that story about the princess and the P?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm having a love affair with Earth right now. All things brown, barren, rocky, earthy. Heart open, womb wide. In the belly, something new grows big. Scared, I want it. I want it all. Want it now. Want to die that way. Body finally full. This is the promise. Rock woos. Earth heals. The mother is forgiving. I know that not all poets do this, and I don't think of myself as a poet who's always thinking grim thoughts, but it's hard not to think about mortality. I suppose it's particularly hard when you live at Sarasota Bay Club. But somehow or other I got myself into studying Jungian psychology, and I was very attracted to the idea of living as complete a life as possible. And in order to do that, you had to really sort of promise yourself that you would become as authentic as you could, and to let go of old patterns that were keeping you from being able to live that complete life. And don't rush into it. It's a lot of work. But but it's good as a poet because it gives you material. This is called Talking Myself Down. You know that time at the circus when the aerialists climb to the tent top? The audience stills. A boy swings upside down and backwards, arms outstretched, biceps bulging, poised to catch a girl who flies. And a girl in spangled leotard and tights, posed on a tiny platform high above us, catapults herself and soars. That time when she suspends in air, that stunning time when no one breathes between. I wonder, when I reach my own finale, when flesh and spirit must take separate bows, will the daring hurl toward new adventures, trusting in that time between, while I lie dizzied on a bed just feet above the floor, clutching any hand who will have me, afraid to go where I have never been. I want to leave with better grace than all my hanging onto earth suggests. I practice when I can on airplanes, when turbulence and seatbelt signs become my own trapezes. I think about the ones I love, count savings still unused, the benefit of my untimely end. Picture well-attended funerals, console myself by feeling missed. I will my muscles to relax, unclench the death grip on my seat arms. Imagine calmly flying free like spangled girls in leotards who dare to love the time between. have just 3 more. Are you up for 3 more?
Yeah.
Well, most of you knew Stu Jacobson, and as I said, most of you know that he passed away just 3 weeks ago. It was, to us, quite unexpected. He was in the hospital for 5 weeks, but he thought he was Zorba the Greek. He was never going to get old, and I believed him. So this is a poem that I did not write since his death, but this was, sometimes I think we poets anticipate a future we haven't lived yet. And now this seems to be the right poem to dedicate to Stu. Second chance. A railing. Once. Memorized as a blind person might, with fingertips and hand and palm, the delicate bits of salt embedded in the smoothly varnished surface, the length and contours and solidity of the wood. Hearing the throb of motors and crash of prow cut through me to the rushing sea. Tasting the salt air on my lips, minting my breath. Giving myself over to the railing so that later I could memorize your arms. And sometimes I fall very short, but this is a poem that I like to believe that I can someday learn from. Changing shapes. I'm not so interested these days in shape. As I am in shapelessness and flow. What good does it do to change from square to circle, or triangle to polygon or helix, when what is called for is letting go? I think it's best to be like water, to be not just the ocean, but to know the tide and current as supplicant and lover. I'm not so interested in hanging on to any shape when the challenge is to learn to flow, to be the wave that cascades or laps or crashes without protest against a hostile or a foreign, or with luck, a gentle shore. There is punishment in clinging, not God's, but just because it goes against the order of things. I know that, yet I do it anyway. Imitating the ocean is presumption. Still, I haven't given up hope of turning into stream or river when I remember in the nick of time to save myself from drowning by refusing to shift back into an old discarded shape. And the last. To Wild Woman. In honor of Clarissa Pinkola Estes, if any of you know of her, she was a Jungian author who's still living and a fascinating writer from my point of view. And Natalie Goldberg, whose workshops I took several times in New Mexico, and whose writing practice was a great gift to me because it helped to teach me to be able to just follow the mind and write without editing too soon. And my writing definitely improved thanks to that. To Wild Woman. Cast out of the kingdom to find the second half of life, lost and confused, the light covered over by clouds, wanting a tree to lean on, but none in sight is big enough to hold her. Too tired to wander further, she lies down on the forest floor to rest. Dead branches, dirt, and moss The rich scent fills her nostrils. Decaying leaves beneath. She joins the compost. Tendrils of things still living curl around her. Rains nourish. Small shoots emerge from spaces between her toes and fingers, belly button, underarms, along her groin and scalp. She begins to take root. Sun warms, leaves cover, snow protects. Spring again, then summer, fall, winter comes. The cycle is repeated. Growing into earth takes time. Each spring, the roots go deeper. Finally, green buds appear on tongue and eyelids, edges of her inner ear. Whisper to her of the promise, witness that it will be kept. In her treeness, she will flower. This time, there is no doubt. Soil is proper. Seed willing. Seasons honored. Roots are home. I'm happy to entertain any questions if anybody has any. You know, my idea, actually, I had written a chapbook several years ago that also got very close to being published professionally. And then the title was Helping to Chart a Lost Continent. It was my sense, it was earlier in the women's movement, and that the whole idea of the feminine, in capital letters with the F, nothing against the masculine, just the idea. Although every one of my college friends, every one of my sorority sisters went on to have some sort of career later in their lives, but that it's taken a long time for the feminine, for women. I know some here who I bow down at their feet because they knew early on what they needed to do with their lives. But for a lot of us, it took us longer to get where we were going. So I see the lost continent as the feminine, as an equal partner to the masculine, not be better than or whatever, as opposed to what I consider to be the patriarchy, which is a sort of out of control masculine that thinks that it's, you know, that the way we're managing the climate and everything else is. So that's what the lost, and the lost continent for me is my own part of that. And then everybody else, and everybody's gifts. Everybody, from my point of view, has a light that needs to shine. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be a writer or a painter or a professor or anything like that. My wonderful daughter who's here is a professional organizer. And when she was a little girl, she used to say, I have no talents, Mother, because I was a writer and I was involved in theater. And I sadly have to admit that I didn't recognize what her being so neat and organized meant in terms of talent. So I myself was not encouraging her and she had to find it, and maybe that's the right way anyway. She found it herself, because she had the courage to keep looking until she found where her light could shine, and it sure does. So thank you, Shirley. Good question. Thank you. Now with my passion, one more thing, is now anybody who tries to tell me that they're not good enough at whatever they do, you're gonna get my lecture. Anybody else?